girly besties, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're well. In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you guys how to kind of structure your book in the 3-act structure. Of course, when you're writing your book, it's really important and probably like good to get yourself like that peace of mind when you are going through to actually write your book. You want to know what happens at the start, the beginning, and the end of your book, especially the end, so you can actually see your book getting finished. I think people who don't have at least an idea of the 3-act structure within their mind usually get really lost and unmotivated to finish their book. So today I'm going to be teaching you how to do it, and yeah, let's go ahead and get onto the video. Okay, so what is the 3-act structure? So as a definition, the 3-act structure is a model used in a narrative fiction that divides the story into 3 equal parts. These are called the acts, often called the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. So when you think about acts, think about Shakespeare and the way that he separates his plays, which show the progression of his plot and his story. So it has like an introduction, a rising action where the stakes get increasingly higher and higher, and then finally it's the big crisis. Usually it's a war or a big confrontation, and then after the resolution. So now that you have a little refresher of what the 3-act structure really is, let's go ahead and talk about the first step, which is the setup. Okay, so for the first act, basically something needs to change and disrupt your character's ordinary life. Think of it, what does it look like? What do they usually do? What's their position in society? What's their usual routine? And find a way to absolutely crumble it, crush it, disrupt it. Bring something that writers like to call the catalyst into your story to kind of spark that inciting incident. This incident is the main thing that you should be focusing on when you are rough planning your 3-act structure, because it kind of induces this dramatic sort of situation, which can also be interpreted as the first big plot point, of which changes your story and puts it on a new trajectory in which follows the next act. Okay, so that was kind of easy. You know at least how your character's life is going to be different. You know the sort of act that will kind of disrupt their life and put them on a new journey. And of course, that could be a lot of things. If you need any inspiration, definitely just go on Pinterest, look at your favorite books, media, stories, look at Star Wars. Star Wars is an amazing demonstration of the 3-act structure. But yeah, as long as you have a general idea of what can happen, especially at the end of your first chapter, to kind of really make the audience want to read more, want them to get into that second act, in which we're going to talk about now, you're doing sweet. You're doing such a good job, because the second act is kind of usually longer, and in it takes place a lot of character development, plot development, and it's basically where your character tries to resolve the problem or the sort of incident that had happened at the start of your book in Act 1. Usually in this act, the antagonist is actually introduced. So if you maybe have an idea of some sort of force that is to be reckoned with, some sort of enemy of your main character, or some sort of internal struggle, this is where you explore it. Of course, as I said, during your second act, the character arc of your main character / main characters should be very evident, because this is basically where they start to grow. They start to discover their powers, discover the new world that they've stumbled into. Anyways, yes, so basically all those sorts of things are happening, and it's kind of like all up in the air and chaotic, and it's totally fine if you kind of lost track of what is going to happen in your second act, because I know it's kind of bad and you probably shouldn't take my advice on this, but for me, the second act is basically where your character goes from Act 1 to Act 3, and the middle is kind of filler, or at least very like a very roundabout way to get to the end climax. And at least as for now, when I plot my books and like think about the 3-act structure within my stories, I don't really think too much about the middle. Like, I probably don't think about it at all, because all I really think about is, of course, firstly the inciting incident, and then I actually focus on what can happen at the end of the book. And usually that comes very naturally as I'm writing the start of the book. I start to think of the end of the book. I think this is extremely important, because basically what I'm talking about here is the most significant thing that you should make sure that you know when you are writing your book is the start of your book and the end of your book. Because now, if you know these two things, you now have motivation to start your book, and then you have eventual motivation to finish your book. So the third act, what happened? This is basically where the resolution starts to kind of come in. I usually actually think of my third act as the climax, which is kind of interesting because technically it's in the second act. The third act for me is the absolute climax, and then what happens after. And usually, at least for my stories, that resolution is barely half a chapter long. That's how small I like to keep my resolutions, because basically in the third act, everything intensifies. Maybe some characters are having some problems in their relationship. Maybe there's a big war about to break loose. Maybe a character loses their powers, or maybe your characters get lost somewhere. Like, this is basically where everything goes wrong. Like, just think about everything that can go wrong in your book and put it at the end of your book. Make sure the stakes are high, make sure someone's gonna die, like, make it interesting. Also make it very relevant to the start of your book. The most important thing that I want to finish on is to make sure your characters have changed. So as I said about, you know, thinking about the first act and the third act most, with that, don't just think about the plot of how this incident ended up creating this huge climax, this huge incident. Think also about the characters. So basically how I want you to think about this is, how have your characters changed? Look at your characters, even if it is abstract, even if it is just a few notes within your structured diagram or however you want to structure it. Simply think about how your character has changed. How are they a different person? In what ways could Act 2, and this is kind of how you figure out what happens in Act 2, changed your character for the better or for the worse? Think about how their morals have changed. Maybe their relationships with people, maybe their powers or what they thought about themselves, their perceptions of the world. Think about all these different things and just gain ideas. Because of course I talked about the main theories within the 3-act structure and how to write it, how to come up with these ideas, how the structure kind of works, and of course some tips. For example, don't worry about Act 2, just focus on Act 1 and Act 3, but that's probably bad advice. But if you guys actually want to do it, I encourage you firstly to actually create a diagram, because this encourages you not to go too ham on your plotting. Keep it very loose, keep it very free, because I do encourage you guys, try and pantser through your first draft and keep those main plot beats very loose, very flexible, because you never know what can happen. If you want, just whip out a little diagram in Word, name the 3 acts, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and write down some ideas of what kind of things happen in these stages of the book. Again, be pretty free with yourself. Don't kind of tie yourself down. Don't try to think this is definite, this has to happen. Because as you progress through your book, especially towards the end and throughout the middle, your story is going to inevitably change. And with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If it helped and maybe just gave you some ideas, made you kind of understand the 3-act structure a little bit more. Because of course it's extremely good and a very good way to kind of have a full rounded story that makes sense. However, your story does not in the slightest need to follow this structure. Your climax could be going on for half the book, or maybe your inciting incident happens at the end of the book. I don't know how that would work, but it can work, I guess. Anyways guys, please subscribe if this helps, and of course definitely stay tuned for more future videos, because I am planning so many cool videos for you guys. But anyways, I love you guys and I wish you luck in your 3-act structure. Okay, bye bye.